What if one quiet act done without a single word could change the course of two lives forever? And what if years later the past returned? In the most unexpected elevator ride of all. Before we begin this deeply moving story of second chances and quiet courage, we invite you to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy heartfelt tales about love healing and the beauty of being seen. Now, settle in. This is one you won't forget. Single dad fixed elevator at 1 a.m. Then the CEO stepped in and said, "Don't press the button." Yet. The storm had rolled in fast sheets of rain lashed against the glass facade of the Evercrest building, the tallest tower in Midtown Manhattan. Thunder cracked like a whip above the skyline, rattling the windows of the 43rd floor. The lobby lights flickered once, then again, and the intercom snapped to life. Maintenance to elevator 2. Malfunction reported between floors 42 and 43. Jake Harper stood up from his folding chair in the dimly lit maintenance room, rubbing his eyes with a calloused hand. It was just past 1 a.m. He rolled his shoulders stiff from crouching over wiring all night and grabbed his toolbox. Outside the hallway was silent, echoing with the hum of air vents and the faint patter of rain tapping the glass. He pressed the service elevator button, watched it descend with a dull clunk, and stepped inside. The doors closed behind him like a sigh. Jake liked the night shift. It was quiet, anonymous. No one looked him in the eye. No one asked about his past. In this sleepless city, people assumed the man in grease-stained overalls fixing things at midnight didn't have a story. That was how he preferred it. When the doors opened again, he emerged into the executive-level sleek black tile, brushed steel accents, and the faint lingering scent of jasmine air freshener. This floor was usually empty by 9 p.m. even on deadline weeks. But tonight, as he approached elevator 2, a soft yellow light pulsed from inside the cab. The screen above the door read, "Out of service." He pried open the panel and leaned inside. Wires were jumbled where they shouldn't be, like someone had tampered with the override. Frowning, Jake pulled a headlamp from his belt, slipped it on, and knelt beside the motor casing. Rain drummed harder against the nearby window as he rewired the main circuit. Then a sudden snap of electricity. Pain seared through his forearm. Jake cursed under his breath, staggering back. A jagged piece of the panel had sliced open the side of his wrist. Blood welled instantly dark against his skin. He reached into his pocket, tore off a strip from an old t-shirt he kept for emergencies, and wrapped it tightly around the cut. No time to panic. He had to finish the job. He turned back toward the open elevator cab and froze. There was someone inside. A woman stood just beyond the threshold, 1 foot in the elevator, 1 foot out. Her long coat was soaked through strands of wet, dark hair clung to her cheeks, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying for a long time. "Don't press the button yet," she said softly. Jake blinked. The storm outside seemed to fall away, replaced by a dense, humming stillness. "I'm sorry," he said, instinctively shifting to block the control panel. "This one's out of service." She didn't move. Her eyes locked on his as if searching for something beneath the surface of his worn face. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." Jake's fingers tightened around the wrench in his pocket. Something about her presence was off. Not dangerous exactly, just misplaced. Like she didn't belong here, not at this hour, not on this floor. "Are you lost?" he asked. "No." The lights inside the cab flickered as the emergency generator kicked in again. She stepped inside fully now, crossing the small space in 2 silent strides. The elevator doors stayed open. Jake had overridden the auto-close feature. She faced him fully now, and something about the way she looked at him sent a shiver down his spine. Not because she was cold, but because her eyes were recognizing him. "Have we met?" he asked, his voice low. Her lips parted, hesitating as if the words were lodged somewhere deep. But she didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at his hand, the one still bleeding through the makeshift bandage. "You're hurt," she whispered. "It's nothing," he muttered, backing away slightly. She stepped closer anyway. Her expression softened. Not pity, not fear. Something older, deeper. She reached into her purse, pulled out a clean white handkerchief, and offered it to him. Jake hesitated. "It's clean," she added. With quiet reluctance, he took it. "Thanks." Silence stretched between them, thick and expectant. The lights buzzed above. Somewhere down the hall, a ventilation unit kicked on. Finally, Jake cleared his throat. "Look, ma'am, I don't know what brought you up here, but I do," she interrupted. He blinked. "I came to find someone," she said. Jake's brow furrowed. At 1 a.m. she gave the faintest of smiles. Sad. Knowing. Sometimes, the only way to find something real is when the rest of the world is asleep. That line stopped him. Not because it was poetic, but because it felt familiar, like something he might have said once, long ago before everything fell apart. He studied her again. There was something about her face, an echo, a shadow of memory he couldn't quite grab, but he didn't ask. It was late. He was bleeding, and this moment was slipping into strange territory. "I should finish this," he said quietly. She nodded, backing into the far corner of the elevator. Jake knelt to resecure the wiring. As he worked, he felt her eyes on him unblinking. Not predatory, not invasive, just attentive, like watching him meant something to her. When he finally stood up, his hands stained and tired, the panel blinked green. "Fixed," he murmured. She didn't move. Then, softly, she asked, "Do you believe in full circles, Mr.?" He looked at her, puzzled. "Jake." She smiled almost to herself. "Jake." Then she stepped out of the elevator into the hallway, her heels silent against the floor. Without another word, she turned and walked down the corridor, disappearing into the shadows of the executive suites. Jake stared after her. The elevator doors slid shut, and only then did he realize she never told him her name. The next morning arrived in dull gray layers, overcast skies, traffic muffled under wet streets, and the hiss of early buses coasting through puddles. Jake Harper sat at the kitchen table in his modest apartment in Astoria, Queens, sipping lukewarm coffee. His left wrist, freshly cleaned and wrapped with gauze, throbbed dully with each movement. Across the table, his daughter Emma, all of 8 years old and still in her pajamas, was drawing furiously with colored pencils. Her brown curls were wild from sleep, and her tongue stuck out just a little as she focused. Jake watched her for a moment before taking a bite of toast that had long since gone cold. He didn't mind. His mind was still in that elevator. The woman had vanished into the hallway as silently as she had appeared, leaving behind only the strange weight of her words. Something about her had stirred a part of him he thought he'd sealed off for good. There was recognition in her gaze, real not imagined, but from where Daddy Emma chirped, not looking up. "Yeah, your hand's all bandaged again." "You okay?" Jake nodded. "Just a little scrape at work." Emma looked up now, skeptical. "A scrape doesn't make you stare at your toast for 10 minutes. He smiled. "Are you timing me?" "No, but I started breakfast and finished a whole unicorn," she said, holding up her drawing with pride. The creature had rainbow wings, a starry tail, and unusually long eyelashes. Jake leaned over to examine it. "That's the most magical horse I've ever seen. It's a unicorn, Dad. Right sorry. Shows what I know." Emma tilted her head. "You look tired." Jake hesitated. Didn't sleep much. He didn't tell her about the woman in the elevator, about the moment that felt like being seen for the first time in years, about how for one brief second he felt like someone knew who he was, or who he had been. Instead, he kissed the top of Emma's head. "Go get dressed, Peanut. We'll stop for muffins before school." As she ran off, her little feet thumping down the hallway, Jake sat back and sighed. Then he reached for his toolbox. He had another 12-hour shift tonight. That evening, rain returned like an old impatient friend. The city glistened in damp orange hues as Jake entered the Evercrest building through the side service entrance. The front lobby, a polished gallery of glass and marble, was already winding down lights, dimming security, nodding with practiced disinterest. Jake changed into his uniform in the basement maintenance room, washed his hands again, and checked the wound on his wrist. The gauze was dry. Good enough. He grabbed the clipboard and scanned the evening work orders, a few bulb replacements, a minor HVAC issue on the 26th floor, and a note in block print at the bottom, recheck elevator to level 43. System restart incomplete. N.W. Jake frowned. N.W. He stared at the initials. Could it be? He checked the employee directory posted on the back wall. There, under the corporate leadership heading, was her name, Natalie Winters, CEO, Evercrest Holdings. Natalie. He leaned in toward her photo. She looked different in it, composed, camera-ready, the kind of high-powered executive Jake usually avoided. But behind the sleek business attire and restrained smile was the same face from last night. Not soaked in rain, not trembling from some unnamed sadness, but her. His stomach turned slightly. She was the CEO, and yet she had stood in front of him with bare honesty, not an ounce of superiority in her tone. What did she want from him? Jake considered skipping the elevator check. Technically, he'd already fixed it. But curiosity gnawed at him. So did something else, a feeling he couldn't name but hadn't felt in years. At 10:23 p.m., Jake returned to level 43. The hallway was quieter than usual. The polished marble floors reflected the emergency lighting, casting a soft orange glow that made the place feel almost sacred. He approached elevator 2, slowly listening to the hum of the motor above the distant rush of wind outside. He ran a diagnostic on the panel. Everything red-green. Still, he hesitated. Then from the end of the hallway came the unmistakable sound of heels clicking on tile. Jake turned. Natalie was walking toward him. Not hurried, not hesitant, measured. She was wearing a navy blouse, sleeves rolled just above her elbows, and black slacks. Her hair was tied back damp from the mist outside. She carried no briefcase, no papers. Just a paper bag with what smelled like hot coffee. "You came," she said simply. Jake offered a polite nod. There was a follow-up request on the work order. Her lips curved slightly. "I left that." He didn't answer right away. "I just wanted to make sure the system was okay," she added. "And that you were okay." Jake looked down at his bandaged wrist, then back at her. "You didn't need to come all the way out for that." "Maybe not, but I wanted to." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. Just full. Something unspoken drifted in the air, recognition maybe, or something even older. Natalie stepped closer and handed him the bag. Coffee, and a fresh muffin. "Thought maybe you hadn't eaten." Jake took it, unsure what to say. "Thanks. I'm not here to supervise your work," she added. "I just saw you last night, and you looked like someone who carries a lot more than tools." Jake blinked. That hit too close. He straightened. "Look, I appreciate the gesture, Ms. Winters, Natalie," she interrupted. "Okay, Natalie, but whatever you think you saw, I'm just the guy who fixes things." Her eyes didn't leave his. Sometimes the people who fix things are the ones most in need of fixing themselves. Jake couldn't look away. The elevator behind him dinged softly. The system had reset itself. Green light pulsed above the panel. He turned to look. When he turned back around, she was already walking away. Not a word more, just a whisper left in the air between them. And for the first time in years, Jake felt the quiet hum of something beginning. Something real. He just didn't know what yet. Friday evening came with a hush. The storm had passed, but the city still wore its aftertaste, wet concrete blurred reflections on slick sidewalks, and the heaviness that followed something unresolved. Jake stood near the maintenance locker on the lower floor, finishing his second cup of bad vending machine coffee. The bitter taste lingered, but it kept him awake. He hadn't told anyone about Natalie Winters. Not his co-worker Ron, who'd just clocked out. Not even Emma, who had been busy painting a paper lantern project for school and humming a Taylor Swift song under her breath. Some things felt too strange to name out loud, like speaking them might break their spell. He tried to convince himself there was nothing special about that hallway conversation. CEOs were allowed to be kind, even mysterious, even warm. But something about the way she'd looked at him made Jake feel like she'd seen straight through the walls he'd built quietly, gently, and without asking for permission. Now, as he checked the final task list for the evening, a familiar note was scribbled in delicate handwriting, Elevator 2. Please verify. N.W. It wasn't necessary. There had been no alerts in the system all day, but he understood. It wasn't about the elevator. He didn't know what it was about. Still, he found himself heading up. Level 43 was almost entirely dark save for the hallway sconces casting honey-colored light onto the polished stone. Jake approached Elevator 2, toolbox in hand, heart annoyingly alert. He ran diagnostics again, perfect. He had no reason to be there. That's when he saw her. Not in a dress, not in heels, but in worn jeans, a gray sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up her dark hair loosely tied back. She wasn't the towering figure from the corporate photo. She looked normal, tired even, but her expression lifted when she saw him. I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think you'd leave another note, Jake replied, one brow raised. Natalie smiled. Well, I figured if I kept pretending the elevator was broken eventually, you'd get annoyed enough to say something. Jake gave a half laugh. Is that what CEOs do when they need to get someone's attention? Only when they're terrible at small talk, she admitted, then motioned to the bench by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sit with me? He hesitated, then nodded. They sat, their reflections faintly visible in the dark glass. The city twinkled beneath them, stretching wide alive and unaware of the strange moment unfolding 43 stories above its heartbeat. I used to come up here late at night, she said softly before I took over the company. When my dad was still running things, I'd sneak into his office just to look out at the lights. I thought if I stared long enough, I'd understand something about the world. Jake glanced at her. Did it work? She shook her head. Not really, but it made me feel like I wasn't drowning. There was no sound but the faint buzz of the elevator shaft and the distant hum of a heating unit kicking on. Jake watched her carefully now, not the CEO, but the woman. Last night she said you asked if we'd met. He nodded slowly. Yeah. You looked like you knew me. I do, she said. Then quickly corrected, I remember you. From years ago, but I wasn't sure it was you. Until I saw the scar. Jake's chest tightened. What scar? She reached over gently, not quite touching but motioning to his wrist. That one. He looked down. The gauze was gone now, replaced by a thin red line like a memory carved into skin. I don't remember meeting you, Jake said carefully. When was this? She took a breath. 2017. Grand Central Station. I was not okay. I just found out something personal, family stuff, it doesn't matter now, but I was standing near the edge of the platform. Crying. No one stopped. She looked away. But you did. Jake frowned. I did. You didn't say anything. You just sat down next to me. Gave me your sandwich. Didn't ask questions. I remember that more clearly than anything else from that night. Jake leaned back, absorbing the weight of it. Slowly, the memory began to stir. That night. A woman on the edge of the yellow line, her shoulders trembling. He had sat beside her, unsure of what to say, so he said nothing. That was the same day, the same evening. He got the call about Laura, the plane crash, the unimaginable. You saved me, Natalie whispered, and I never forgot. Jake's throat was tight. I didn't do anything. You showed up, she said simply. When I felt invisible to the rest of the world, you showed up. And after that, I decided I wouldn't waste the second chance. He turned his head toward her. Why tell me this now? Because I've spent 7 years trying to be someone who deserved that moment. Someone who made things better. For my staff, for my family, for people who'd been broken like me. But I realized I never thanked the person who gave me that second chance. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I wrote this a week after that night, she said. I didn't know your name. I never sent it, but I carried it with me ever since. Jake stared at it. Take it, she said softly. It's yours. His fingers brushed the edge of the paper as he took it from her hand. The paper was worn, the edges slightly curled. You saved my life, she added. And I don't know if anyone's ever said that to you before. He didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. Instead, he sat in silence with the letter in his lap and the city stretching wide beneath them. His heart beat steadily more awake than it had in years, and though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew. This wasn't just the second time they met. It was the beginning of something new. Jake didn't open the letter that night. It sat on the kitchen counter, its edges slightly curled with age as though it had been waiting through storms and seasons for this exact moment, and yet Jake couldn't bring himself to touch it again. He made Emma's lunch. He packed her backpack. He helped her find the missing blue sneaker she claimed had been eaten by the shoe monster under the couch. He did everything except open that envelope. Because inside he feared was something too real, something that would change the way he saw himself. He wasn't a savior. He was a man trying to rebuild a life out of broken pieces, raising a daughter he wasn't sure he deserved, doing a job no one noticed. He didn't save people. But Natalie's eyes had told him otherwise. At work that night, Jake moved slower than usual. Every clink of his wrench, every elevator ding, every buzzing light seemed distant. His mind kept replaying her voice. You saved me. Around midnight, he climbed to the roof. Technically off limits, but no one monitored the night crew too closely. He stood by the railing, the city sprawled beneath him like a living, breathing thing. The sky was unusually clear after days of rain, and he could see all the way to the bridges, the pulsing arteries of a place that never stopped moving, never waited for anyone. He took the letter from his jacket pocket. It was handwritten. Black ink, precise, yet slightly smudged in places like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Dear stranger, I don't know your name. You didn't ask for mine. You didn't try to stop me or fix me. You just sat there quiet, still offering your sandwich and your silence like it was the most natural thing in the world. You didn't lecture me. You didn't panic. You didn't even look surprised. You just saw me. You'll never know what that did for me. You'll never know that after you left, I decided not to step forward. I took the train instead, and the next morning I applied to a job I never thought I'd get. I moved home. I made amends with my sister. I got help. I'm trying. All because you stayed a moment longer than anyone else. If you're reading this someday, thank you. I'm trying to live in a way that makes your kindness matter. Yours truly, N. Jake folded the letter back with trembling fingers. He didn't cry. He just stood there still like he had been that day in the train station, heart quiet, soul raw. Because this letter didn't just tell him what he'd done for her. It reminded him that he had once been the kind of man who showed up. And maybe he still could be. The next morning, he was the one who left the note. Natalie found it taped to the inside of the elevator shaft door when she arrived. It was short, written in block letters on a yellow sticky note. Thank you for living. J. She stared at it for a long time before sliding it gently into her purse. That weekend, Jake did something he hadn't done in over a year. He invited someone over. Ron, his coworker and oldest friend in the building crew, showed up with a six-pack, a box of Legos for Emma, and a suspicious look. You okay, man? Ron asked as he watched Jake clear the cluttered coffee table. Jake nodded. I think so. You think so? That's not very convincing. I've been thinking about some things. About starting over. About letting Emma know more about, well, everything. Ron cracked open a beer. You mean about Laura? Jake flinched at the name, but didn't look away. Yeah. Ron studied him for a moment. You never talk about her. because I didn't think I deserved to. Jake Ron said, his voice lower now. What happened wasn't your fault. I was the one who maintained that plane. She flew standby because of me. If I hadn't, she chose to surprise you. She loved you. She loved that kid. And life isn't math. It doesn't add up clean. Jake didn't respond, but something in his shoulders softened. Emma bounded into the room, then holding her freshly painted lantern. Daddy, can we light it tonight? Jake smiled. Yes, sweetheart, we'll light it together. That evening, after Ron left and Emma was asleep, Jake returned to his toolbox to grab a flashlight. But instead of the flashlight, he found something tucked between the screwdrivers, a small hand-drawn card. On the front was a drawing of a stick figure man in a hard hat standing next to a tall building with a big red heart above it. Inside, in crayon-scrawled handwriting, it read, "To the best fixer in the world. Love, Emma." Jake laughed softly, the kind of laugh that felt like it loosened something deep in his chest. He sat down, the letter from Natalie still in his pocket and the card from Emma in his hand. 2 women, 2 moments, 2 reminders that kindness didn't always make a noise, but it never disappeared. He didn't know what would happen next with Natalie. He didn't know if this strange thread between them was a story just beginning or one that had already said what it needed to say. But what he did know for the first time in years was this: he was not invisible. And sometimes just staying with someone for one more moment could echo for a lifetime. Natalie watched the city from her office window, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched tea. The steam had long faded, but she hadn't moved in 15 minutes. Below her, the streets of Manhattan pulsed with a rhythm she once found reassuring, the world moving forward relentlessly alive. But tonight she felt like the only one standing still. The letter was gone. She'd finally handed it over after years of carrying it, reading it, when the nights got too dark, when the weight of legacy and loneliness pressed down hard. And now, she had no idea what came next. She wasn't sure if Jake would read it, if he even remembered her. He hadn't said a word about Grand Central. No flicker of recognition, no shared memory. Just a quiet stare and a sticky note reply that still made her throat tighten every time she thought about it. Thank you for living. She closed her eyes, leaned her forehead against the glass. That moment on the platform had been the lowest of her life. And now the man who had saved her was standing in front of her again and didn't even know he had done it. She didn't know whether that made it more tragic or more beautiful. Jake sat at his small dining table, a notepad in front of him, pen in hand. But the words wouldn't come. Emma was asleep in the next room, the door cracked open just enough for him to hear her breathing. The house was warm, quiet, and smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old books. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of a road with no map. He couldn't stop thinking about what Natalie had said. He remembered the train station vaguely. A woman crying. The ache in his chest from the phone call. He hadn't yet received the call about Laura's plane, the accident, the world crumbling. He remembered giving someone a sandwich, sitting beside her for a few minutes. But everything else blurred under the weight of grief that came immediately after. And now that woman, that girl on the platform, was Natalie Winters. It made his head spin. He stood restless and paced the room. Her face kept returning to him, the damp hair, the quiet sadness, the way she looked at him as if she'd found something she'd been searching for since forever. He wasn't used to being seen like that. He wasn't sure he knew how to receive that kind of gaze anymore. The next time he saw her, it wasn't planned. Jake had been sent to the upper floors to check an air pressure imbalance in the executive conference wing. When he stepped out of the service elevator, clipboard in hand, he nearly walked straight into her. She was coming down the hallway alone, her hair in a loose braid, reading something on her phone. She looked up just in time to stop short. "Oh, sorry," she said, tucking her phone away. Jake cleared his throat. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." A pause. "You didn't," she said softly. "I think I was hoping you would." They stood there for a long moment, suspended in the kind of awkward silence that felt oddly full. Jake looked down at his clipboard, then back at her. "The note? The one you gave me." She straightened slightly. "Did you read it?" He nodded. "I did." Her voice dropped. "Do you remember any of it?" Jake searched for words. "Pieces, flashes. I remember the way you looked. I remember that I didn't want to leave you alone." Natalie swallowed something shifting in her expression. "I'm sorry I didn't remember more," he added. "I think that whole day is tangled with what happened next." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Your wife?" He nodded slowly. She stepped closer, not invading his space, just enough for her voice to lower without being overheard. "I didn't know," she said. "Not then. Not until I saw your name in the system and looked you up." Jake exhaled. "I don't talk about her much. Not even with my daughter. She was on that flight." "Yeah," he said. "She was surprising me. Emma was only 1. Laura booked the ticket last minute through standby. She called right before boarding, told me not to burn the pasta." He gave a half laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I found out about the crash 20 minutes later. I was still holding the phone when the news alert came through." Natalie closed her eyes for a moment. "Jake, I'm so sorry. It's been 7 years," he said. "You'd think it would get easier. Does it?" He looked out the window at the skyline, then back at her. "No, but it changes. The pain doesn't shrink exactly. You just grow around it." She nodded slowly. "Then, why didn't you tell me that night?" Jake's brow furrowed. "Tell you what? That you were in pain. That you'd lost someone." He was quiet for a long beat. "Because you needed someone to just sit next to you," he said at last. "Not bleed all over you." Natalie's eyes welled. "You were grieving, and you gave me comfort." Jake gave a half shrug. "We all need to be seen sometimes. Even if, just for a minute." They stood in silence again, but this time there was nothing awkward about it. There was understanding. A quiet truce between two people who had shared pain in different ways, but somehow met in the middle of it. Finally, Natalie smiled. "Do you want to grab a coffee? I mean, not in an elevator." Jake smiled back, surprised at how natural it felt. "I know a decent vending machine downstairs." She laughed, a real soft laugh that lit up her face. "Maybe I'll bring muffins again." And as they walked together down the corridor, Jake felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Hope. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet kind, the kind that waits patiently in dark places. And sometimes rides elevators. The coffee wasn't good. Natalie took a sip from the paper cup Jake handed her and gave him a look that needed no words. He shrugged unbothered and leaned against the edge of the supply closet turned break room. It smelled faintly of motor oil dust and something like old socks. Still, the quiet was real. So was the company. "I think your vending machine lied to me," she murmured, glancing at the cup like it had betrayed her. Jake chuckled. "It's honest about everything but the hazelnut. That's just marketing." She laughed more freely this time, less guarded. They sat on the old bench across from the supply lockers, the hum of fluorescent lights above them, the whir of distant fans in the background. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt himself relax in someone's presence. Natalie didn't ask anything of him. She didn't push. She just was there. And it reminded him of something. He pulled out a small sketch folded into quarters soft at the edges from being in his wallet too long. He handed it to her without explanation. She unfolded it carefully. A crayon drawing of a stick-figure man in a hard hat beside a tall building. A red heart floated above his head. Natalie smiled as her eyes scanned the bottom corner where, "To the best fixer." "Love Emma" was written in crooked, confident letters. "She drew this for you." Jake nodded. "Last week. She's talented. She's honest." He said, taking the drawing back and folding it with care. "And way too observant." Natalie looked at him for a moment, then said, "She doesn't know what happened to your wife." "Does she?" Jake shook his head. "Not all of it. She knows her mom died in an accident. But the rest?" His voice trailed off. How do you tell a kid that kindness broke you? Natalie tilted her head. I don't think kindness broke you, Jake. It did, though, he said quietly. Laura flew that night because I got off early. I'd spent the day helping a colleague whose dad had a stroke. She covered my shift. I went home to cook dinner. She surprised me. Booked a last-minute standby seat because the airline owed me a favor. He paused. She did it because I helped someone. And she died for it. Natalie's voice was gentle. She died because of circumstance. Not because you were kind. Jake stared at the floor. I know that. In my head. But somewhere deep, there's this echo. Like maybe if I'd been selfish, she'd still be here. She didn't offer platitudes. Instead, she said, what you did at that station 7 years ago, you saved someone else. You didn't know it. You didn't try to. You just showed up. Her voice softened. And now, I get to show up for you. Jake looked at her then. Really looked. And he saw it, the echo of pain she carried, the resilience layered over it, the way her strength didn't cancel her softness, but came from it. She wasn't some CEO marble statue. She was flesh and spirit shaped by battles she'd quietly survived. You're not what I expected, he said. Natalie raised a brow. Is that a compliment? He nodded. Yeah. She smiled, and something flickered in the air between them. Not romance, not yet, but a bond growing roots. The kind that takes time. The kind that doesn't need to be named right away. Just then, Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Emma's school. Everything okay? Natalie asked. He tapped the screen and listened, brow furrowing. Yeah, she's fine. Just a slight fever. They said she got sleepy in class. Natalie stood. Go. I'll finish your coffee for you. Jake gave her a grateful look. You sure? She nodded. She's your priority. Always. As Jake packed up his tools and left, Natalie lingered a moment longer, holding the crumpled paper cup in her hand. She looked at the folded drawing again. The red heart floated above the little man's head, and it reminded her that kindness didn't always come in big, cinematic gestures. Sometimes it came in sandwiches, in elevator repairs, in crayon drawings from little girls who still believed their fathers could fix the world. That evening, Natalie rang the buzzer outside Jake's apartment building. He opened the door, looking tired a little, disheveled, but surprised. Natalie. She held up a brown paper bag, soup and juice. I figured Emma could use something warm and you could use something that didn't come from a vending machine. He stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was modest but homey, toys tucked into bins, a plant trying its best on the windowsill, family photos in simple frames. Emma peeked from behind her bedroom door. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes lit up. Are you the lady with the muffins? Natalie laughed. Guilty. Jake looked sheepish. She remembers everything. Emma stepped into the living room slowly. I like muffins. Natalie knelt beside her. I brought chicken noodle soup, too, and tiny star-shaped crackers. Emma's grin widened. You can stay if you want. Jake looked at her, half amused, half in awe. Emma. Natalie smiled at the girl. Only if your dad says it's okay. He hesitated, heart thudding in his chest, then nodded. Yeah, it's okay. That night, the three of them ate soup at the small kitchen table. Natalie helped Emma cut stars from construction paper while Jake cleaned up the dishes. There was no dramatic music, no declarations. Just a quiet warmth, a steadiness that had been missing for too long. And in the hush of that evening, as Emma showed Natalie where she kept her collection of sticker books, Jake realized something. The woman he once saved had found a way to save him right back. It was nearly midnight when Jake stood once more on the worn concrete of Grand Central Terminal. The cavernous space had thinned out to only a few stragglers, late travelers with coffee in hand, maintenance crews mopping distant platforms, and the occasional hum of an arriving train. But to Jake, The air still pulsed with the echoes of something more permanent memory. He stood by platform 27, just a few feet from the edge, right where he'd sat 7 years ago beside a woman whose name he didn't know. A woman who back then he hadn't recognized as someone at the end of her rope. Now she had become the most surprising constant in his life. Jake knelt down and placed his hand gently on the worn stone ledge. The same cold surface where he'd once passed Natalie a sandwich and said nothing at all. It was the same day he got the call. The same day his world shattered. He remembered the sequence with jarring clarity now, the way the train's brakes screeched, how Natalie's shoulders had shaken without sound, how he'd instinctively sat down beside her, not sure if his presence mattered, but afraid of what might happen if he left. He didn't say anything that day because he didn't have anything left to say. He had just learned the worst news of his life, and yet he had stayed. That he realized now was the point. Not to speak, not to rescue. Just to witness, and sometimes witnessing someone's pain was enough to stop it from swallowing them whole. He stood slowly, breath caught somewhere deep, the ache in his chest both heavy and peaceful. Then he pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. A letter. One he hadn't intended to write but had been forming in his mind since Natalie handed him hers. Dear N. I didn't remember your face that night, but I remember the silence. I remember the way it felt like the whole station had stopped breathing. I sat down because you looked like someone who needed someone to sit with them, and I didn't want to leave you alone. What I didn't know was that you were doing the same for me. I got a phone call right after you left. That was the day I lost my wife. I don't think I've told anyone that out loud until now. You were the last quiet moment I had before everything broke. You may think I saved you, but the truth is, you saved me too. Thank you for coming back, for seeing me when I stopped seeing myself. Jake. He tore the page from the notebook and slipped it into his coat. He didn't know if he'd ever give it to her, but writing it was enough for now. When Jake returned home just after 1, he found Natalie sitting quietly on the front steps of his apartment building, a small thermos in her hands. Her coat was dusted with frost. You didn't have to wait, he said, surprised. I didn't want to leave until I knew you were okay. He looked at her chest, tightening with gratitude. You knew I went there, didn't you? She nodded. I figured that's where you'd go. Grand Central. You never really got to say goodbye. Jake sat beside her. You were the last good thing that happened before I got the call. I know. They sat there for a while in the quiet breath steaming in the cold. Then Natalie handed him the thermos. It's tea. Real tea, not break room grade. He sipped. It was spiced and warm. He held it in both hands. I wrote you something, he said softly. She turned to him. You don't have to, I know, but I wanted to. He reached into his coat and handed her the folded page. She held it gently as if it might vanish if she gripped it too tight. I won't read it now, she whispered, but I'll keep it. Jake looked at her heart unguarded. You don't have to carry me like a memory, Natalie. She met his gaze. I'm not. You're not a ghost, Jake. You're standing right here. So am I. We've both lost, but we're still here. A silence passed, filled with more comfort than words could hold. Then Natalie asked, Do you ever talk about her? With Emma. Jake sighed. Not really. I've told her a little, but not who Laura was. Not how she lit up a room without trying. Not how she'd play piano barefoot or sing off key just to make Emma giggle. I don't know how to start without breaking. You start by remembering, Natalie said gently. The rest will follow. Jake nodded, letting her words settle. A few moments later, Natalie stood. I should go. It's late. Jake stood, too hesitating. You don't have to. She smiled softly. Not tonight, but maybe another. He nodded again, a quiet promise in his eyes. Yeah, maybe another. She walked away into the cold, her footsteps light like she was carrying less than before. Jake stayed on the step, sipping the tea, watching her until she disappeared. He didn't say goodbye, because this time, he knew. She'd be back. The following Monday morning, Jake woke to the sound of gentle knocking. He rubbed his eyes, confused. Emma was still asleep, curled in a ball under her fuzzy unicorn blanket, one foot sticking out. Sunlight spilled through the cracked blinds and the apartment was still and warm. The knock came again. He opened the door to find a small white envelope taped to the outside. Just his name, written in the same neat, unmistakable handwriting. No stamp, no return address. He peeled it off, carefully stepped back inside, and sat down at the kitchen table. For a long moment, he simply stared at the envelope, his name written across the front like a whisper. When he finally opened it, the letter inside read, Jake. I wasn't sure if I should write this, or if it was even my place, but sometimes words can hold us when hands can't. I read your letter 3 times. I cried all 3. Not because it hurt, because it healed. You said I saved you, but I think we both know that's not how it works. Maybe we just found each other at the exact moment we both needed someone to stay. And now, after all these years, you're still staying. With Emma. With this quiet life you've built. With your memories. You're still choosing to show up even when it hurts. Thank you for staying that night. Thank you for giving me space to keep breathing. Thank you for living, Jake. I see you now. I think I always did. Natalie Jake sat back in his chair, eyes burning. He wasn't a man who cried easily, not since Laura. But something about the simple weight of those words cracked open the walls he didn't even know he'd rebuilt. He folded the letter and placed it beside Emma's drawing of the red-hearted fixer. And for the first time, the ache in his chest felt lighter. Not gone, but no longer alone. Later that afternoon, Jake picked Emma up from school early. She was bouncing with energy again, flushed with stories about a class hamster and a near-death experience involving a runaway juice box. He laughed as he buckled her into the car. "Hey, Peanut," he said as they pulled into their block. "How do you feel about telling someone more about your mom tonight?" Emma tilted her head. "Like a story." "Exactly like a story." She nodded thoughtfully. "Will it be sad?" "Maybe a little," Jake said, "but it'll be real. And good." Emma smiled. "Okay, I want to know the good stuff." Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. "There's lots of it." That evening, Natalie arrived just before 6. This time, not with muffins or soup or tea, but with a small wrapped box tied in string. Jake opened the door before she knocked. He stepped aside to let her in, his voice soft. "Hey, she replied, holding up the box. "I brought something small." He closed the door behind her. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." Emma was already waiting in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a stack of old photo albums Jake had finally pulled from the top shelf of the closet. "You're here," she said brightly. "You can look at baby pictures with us." Natalie sat beside her. "That's my favorite kind of story time." Jake lowered himself onto the couch, one photo already in his hand. It was of Laura, barefoot in the backyard, holding baby Emma up to the sun like a tiny goddess wrapped in pink cotton. "Was Mommy funny?" Emma asked. Jake nodded, smiling. She was hilarious and loud. She used to sing Disney songs in the kitchen, like she was on Broadway. Emma giggled. "Did she have a good voice?" "No," Jake said with a grin. "Not at all." Natalie laughed with them, her eyes warm but quiet. They spent the next hour flipping pages, Jake narrating as he went, stories of messy birthday cakes, camping trips that ended in the car because of rain, Laura's terrible handwriting, and her ability to quote every line from The Princess Bride. Emma soaked it in like sunlight. Natalie watched the two of them, her chest, full heart open. Then gently she handed Jake the box. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small hand-carved wooden frame. Inside the frame was a quote written in elegant script. "Sometimes the people who fix things are the ones most in need of fixing themselves." Jake stared at it for a long time. Natalie leaned in. "It reminded me of you." He looked up. "That night in the elevator. When you said those words, I've thought about them every day since. I meant them." He set the frame down gently on the shelf beside Laura's photo and Emma's drawing. Then he turned to Natalie and said something he hadn't said to anyone in years. "Would you stay for dinner?" She smiled. "I'd love to." Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch mid-movie, Natalie helped Jake carry her to bed. They stood at her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. "She's a good kid," Natalie whispered. "She is," Jake replied. "She's the best thing I ever did." As they returned to the kitchen, Natalie paused beside the photo frame. Jake watched her hand brush against the edge of it, fingers tracing the wood like it anchored something unspoken. And then, quietly, he said, "I don't want this to be just borrowed time." She looked up, surprised. "It's not. I've spent 7 years thinking everything good would be taken away again," he continued. "But I'm starting to believe. Maybe kindness doesn't come to steal something. Maybe it comes to stay." Natalie stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere, Jake." He reached for her hand. Their fingers touched, then interlaced. It was the first real touch between them, no accidental brush, no bandaged hand passed across tools. Just skin and warmth and the silent agreement of two people who had once survived by sitting quietly beside someone else's pain. And now, finally, they were no longer sitting alone. The elevator that once waited had finally taken them somewhere worth staying. Jake hadn't planned to tell Emma everything that night. He thought he'd begin gently, one story here, a memory there, maybe a faded photograph. But kids, he was learning, had a way of pulling the truth out of you without warning. The next morning, as the sun spilled soft light through the curtains and the smell of scrambled eggs filled the kitchen, Emma sat at the table cradling her cup of milk with both hands. "Daddy," she asked suddenly, what was Mommy's favorite song? Jake looked up from the stovetop spatula, frozen mid-flip. He wasn't expecting that. Emma tilted her head. "You said she sang in the kitchen. Did she have a favorite?" Jake turned off the heat. "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "She did." He sat across from her, wiping his hands on a towel. It was an old one, a James Taylor song. "You Can Close Your Eyes." She used to hum it while brushing her hair or folding laundry. Emma nodded solemnly. "Can you sing it?" Jake laughed softly. "I'm not sure you want to hear that." "I do," she said, serious as a judge. And so, with a voice still uncertain and cracked by memory, Jake sang the first few lines. Not well, but with everything he had left. By the time he stopped, Emma was smiling, and Natalie, who had quietly slipped in through the open kitchen door with a tray of cinnamon rolls, stood in the background, her eyes glistening. Jake met her gaze. Neither said a word. Later that day, while Jake was fixing a thermostat on the 12th floor, Emma stayed in Natalie's office. It had been Natalie's idea. Let her hang out for a few hours, she had offered. "You two are due for a break from each other. I won't even try to bribe her with hot chocolate." Jake had chuckled. "You're already her favorite adult?" Now, in Natalie's quiet office, filled with soft light and old books, Emma sat cross-legged on the floor drawing. Natalie glanced down from her laptop. "What are you working on?" Emma held it up. It was a picture of 3 people, a man with messy hair, a woman with bright red cheeks, and a little girl between them holding their hands. In the corner, a small angel with yellow wings floated above them, smiling. Natalie took a breath. "Is that your mommy?" Emma nodded. "I think she watches sometimes, like when I'm sad, or when Daddy gets quiet." Natalie knelt down beside her. "Do you miss her?" "Sometimes," Emma said. "But I didn't know her very long. Mostly, I miss the way Daddy talks about her." Natalie placed a hand over Emma's. "You know, that's kind of beautiful." Emma looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you like my daddy?" Natalie smiled gently. "Because he listens even when he doesn't have the words. Because he fixes things that other people don't even notice are broken. Because he's kind. Even when it hurts." Emma blinked. "He is kind, but he's also kind of stubborn." They both laughed. Then Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I made something. For him. But maybe you can help me give it to him." Natalie unfolded the paper carefully. It was a poem. A simple one. Misspelled words. Rhymed lines. At the top, in purple marker, it read, "A letter for my dad. You make pancakes and you make me smile. Even when you're quiet for a while. I know sometimes you feel kinda sad, but I still think you're the world's best dad. You fix the lights and fix the heat, but your hugs are still my favorite treat. You tell the truth and hold my hand. You're the bravest fixer in the land. Love, Emma." Natalie blinked away tears. "Emma," she said, "this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read." The girl beamed. "Do you think it'll make him happy? I know it will." That evening, Natalie invited Jake and Emma to her place for dinner, a modest brownstone tucked between two ivy-covered buildings in the West Village. It was the kind of home that smelled like lemon oil and old stories. The three of them sat at a round wooden table eating pasta and laughing at Emma's impressions of her school principal. After dessert, Emma stood and said, "I wrote something for you, Daddy." Jake looked up surprised. "You did?" She nodded, handed him the paper, and added, but Natalie helped fold it nice. Jake read it in silence, his thumb brushing the corner of the page. By the time he reached the final line, "You're the bravest fixer in the land," his throat had gone tight. He looked at Emma. "Thank you, sweetheart. You liked it?" He leaned forward and pulled her into a long, quiet hug. "I loved it." Natalie sat across the table watching them. Something inside her swelled not just affection, but awe. Here was a man stitched together by grief and love, a girl shaped by absence yet full of light, and between them a kind of healing no therapy or fortune could ever manufacture. After Emma went to bed having fallen asleep halfway through a movie, Jake joined Natalie on the steps outside. He handed her the folded poem. "She said you helped." "I just read it," she said. That was all her. "She sees more than I ever realized." Natalie turned to him, her voice low. "So do you." They sat in the warm night air, no need to fill the silence, until Jake whispered, "You saved more than one life that day." "Natalie." She looked at him confused. He nodded toward the window where Emma slept. "She's growing up with someone who reminds her that kindness isn't just for stories. It's real. And it stays." Natalie blinked back a rush of emotion. "I think she likes you," Jake added with a smile. "I like her too," she whispered, "and I love the man she's learning from." Jake reached for her hand again, and in that still perfect moment, nothing was broken. Not anymore. The Evercrest building gleamed under the morning sun, all glass and ambition rising into a crisp October sky. Inside the lobby buzzed with life heels clicking across marble elevator doors, pinging open in harmony voices, clipped and caffeinated. But on the lower level, in a tucked-away maintenance office that smelled faintly of solder and coffee grounds, something quieter was happening. Jake Harper stood before a whiteboard holding a dry erase marker in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Across from him sat 4 men and 1 woman, different ages, different backgrounds, all watching him with a cautious sort of hope. This, Jake said, tapping the board is how a service relay communicates with a safety brake. The room was silent except for the squeak of the marker and the occasional scratch of someone taking notes. He paused, then turned back toward them. "And this," he held up a worn fuse he'd pulled from an old motor, "is what happens when you don't respect the wiring." A few chuckles broke the tension. Jake smiled. Behind him, the whiteboard read, "Second Step Technical Foundations." 2 weeks ago, this had only been an idea. Now, it was a fledgling program hosted in a spare workshop behind Evercrest's boiler room, a place for second chances for people like Malik who'd served 3 years for theft, but never stopped sketching circuit boards in prison. For Ruth, a single mother of 2 with a record for shoplifting who could now dismantle a thermostat blindfolded. For men and women who had fallen through the cracks, been labeled and forgotten. But Jake remembered what it was like to need a hand without asking for one. He remembered what it was like to be seen just once and to have that be enough to pull you back. So now he was giving that moment to others. And Natalie had made it possible. After class, Jake stepped into the hallway where Natalie stood waiting, arms folded over a thick folder of grant paperwork. She wore a blazer over jeans, her hair pulled up in a loose knot. She looked powerful, relaxed, like a woman who no longer needed to wear a mask to command a room. "They like you," she said. Jake shrugged. "They like the tools." She handed him a form. The Midtown Civic Council just approved funding for 3 more apprenticeships. Jake took the paper, his eyebrows lifting. Already Natalie smiled. Turns out people love a redemption story, especially when it comes with blueprints. He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know how you pulled this off so fast." "I believed in the man who believed in people nobody else wanted to look at," she said, voice soft. Jake looked down for a moment, then back up. "You know, when I started fixing elevators, I thought I was just patching broken things, but lately it feels more like I'm helping people move again." Natalie's eyes shimmered. "You are." Later that evening, the 3 of them, Jake, Natalie, and Emma, stood inside Elevator 2, the same one where everything had started. Jake had rewired the LED panel so that it now displayed soft blue lighting. The buttons gleamed like polished coins. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement. "I get to press it right?" she asked. Jake grinned. "You earned it." Natalie reached for Emma's hand. "We're only going up 2 floors. Emma nodded solemnly. "But I want to go all the way up one day." "You will," Jake said. "Just don't press emergency stop like last time." Emma giggled and hit the button. The doors closed. For a moment, the elevator hummed upward, and it was just the 3 of them in that small, bright space. The very place where silence had once been heavy and hearts had once been hidden. Now it felt full. Jake turned to Natalie. "Remember when you said this elevator was out of service?" She smirked. "I might have lied." "You did, and you fixed it anyway." He gave a soft laugh. Turns out it wasn't just the elevator. The doors opened on the 45th floor, Evercrest's top floor, newly renovated as a community hub. Glass walls looked out onto the skyline, and in the corner a sign read, "The Second Step Center." For skills, for stories, for starting again. Natalie took Emma's hand. Jake stepped beside them. They walked out together. That night, Jake tucked Emma into bed. She clutched her stuffed bear, her lashes already heavy. "Daddy," she murmured, "I'm glad you met her." He brushed the hair from her forehead. "Me too, sweetheart. She makes you smile more. Not just your mouth, your eyes, too." Jake blinked, heart softening. "She makes a lot of things lighter." Emma yawned. "Are you going to marry her?" Jake laughed under his breath. "Go to sleep, kiddo." She turned onto her side with a sleepy grin. "I'd wear purple at your wedding." He watched her breathe for a moment, then turned off the light. Down the hallway, Natalie stood on the balcony just outside his kitchen, arms resting on the railing, looking out at the city. When Jake joined her, she didn't speak, just leaned slightly into him. "I didn't think I'd get here," he said quietly. "Not just this apartment, but this life." Natalie turned to him. "You didn't get here alone." He took a breath. "No, I didn't." She placed a hand over his. "Kindness doesn't vanish, Jake. It just waits. Until you're ready." He looked at her eyes, full of something old and new all at once. "I'm ready," he said. Then under the quiet hush of city lights and evening wind, Jake kissed her. Not as a thank you, not as a goodbye, but as a man no longer afraid of hope, as a man who once sat beside a stranger at a train station not knowing he was saving himself too. As a man who had finally found his way back up, not just in the elevator, but in every step forward that came after. A year passed, not in a rush, but gently, like pages turning in a book you never wanted to finish. Winter came and left its soft dusting on the edges of rooftops. Spring followed with a cautious warmth. And now, in the gold-touched quiet of early autumn, the city breathed with a slower rhythm. For once, so did Jake. The Second Step program had outgrown the boiler room workshop. With Natalie's support and Jake's insistence on staying hands-on, it now operated out of 2 entire floors in a nearby building where former inmates, recovering veterans, and single parents came not only to learn wiring or heating systems, but to feel visible again. Jake still taught twice a week. He never stood behind a podium. He fixed things on the ground side by side with his students, hands dirty, eyes open. He never wanted to be anyone's hero. But he had become a reason to try again, and in some ways that was more powerful. One afternoon, Emma burst into the kitchen waving a school flyer in both hands. "Daddy, look," she shouted, dropping her backpack and sliding the paper across the table. "We're doing Family Voices Week, and I picked you to come talk." Jake blinked. Family Voices. Emma nodded, breathless. It's when someone in your family comes and tells a story about something they lived through, something brave. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not sure I'm very good at telling stories." Emma rolled her eyes. "You fix elevators and people, Daddy. That's brave. You'll be fine." He laughed, but something in his chest caught. Because maybe, just maybe, she was right. The classroom was warm and bright, full of second graders who wiggled and whispered even when asked not to. Jake sat in a chair much too small for him, knees nearly at his chest with Emma beaming at his side. When it was his turn, he stood in front of the room and said, "Hi, I'm Emma's dad. My name's Jake, and I fix things." The class was instantly interested. "Elevators," he said, "thermostats, old pipes, sometimes vending machines that get stuck when they shouldn't." The kids laughed. "But a while ago," he continued, "I learned that fixing things isn't just about tools. It's about time, about noticing, about showing up even if you don't know what to say." He glanced down at Emma, who gave him a tiny thumbs up from her seat on the rug. "I once sat next to someone who was really sad," Jake said. "I didn't talk. I didn't know how. But I stayed." He paused, letting the stillness land. "Years later," he said, "that person came back into my life, and she reminded me that kindness doesn't always need a lot of words. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to be there." The room was quiet. A boy in the front sniffled. A teacher dabbed at her eyes. Emma smiled wide and proud, and Jake exhaled, grateful at last to have said it out loud. That evening, Natalie found a note on the kitchen table. It was written on a napkin, Jake's handwriting scrawled, "But careful, I never told you what I remembered from that day." It wasn't just the sound of the train. It was the stillness between us. How you didn't speak, how I didn't speak, but something in me decided to stay anyway. I think we both saved each other in that silence, and now we speak every day without fear. That's the real miracle, Nat. Thank you for waiting. Jake. She folded it slowly, pressed it to her chest, and smiled. A few weeks later, they stood in Central Park surrounded by friends, Emma in a lavender dress, Jake in a simple navy suit. The trees were dressed in amber and red. There was no band, no stage, no drama, just a gathering of people who had been changed one way or another by the quiet work of healing. The ceremony was brief. Jake and Natalie exchanged vows they'd written themselves, truthful, imperfect, and completely theirs. When Jake said, "I promise to keep showing up," Natalie wept. When Natalie whispered, "You never needed to rescue me. You just needed to sit beside me," Jake's hands trembled as he took hers. Emma insisted on being the one to hand them the rings. "Because I'm the best part of both of you," she declared. And they had all laughed through tears. That night, the three of them returned to the building where it all began. Jake unlocked the service door, then turned to Natalie. "Are you ready?" She nodded. They stepped into elevator 2, clean humming still lit with that soft blue light Jake had installed long ago. Emma pressed the top floor button, then leaned into Jake's side. The elevator rose. No one spoke, and yet the silence was full of years survived of love, earned of kindness, sown and returned. When the doors opened on the 45th floor, Natalie took Jake's hand Emma clutched the edge of his jacket, and together they stepped into the future. Not just up, but forward. Because sometimes the things we fix us right back. And sometimes the elevator that waited was always meant to carry us home. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories, each one crafted to inspire, heal, and stay with you long after the final word. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We're truly grateful to have you here,